Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we're getting into a classic piece from C.S. Lewis that tackles a huge question a lot of Christians have. What does our faith actually say about building a better society? Right off the bat, Lewis makes it clear he's not offering something new. He says his goal is to talk about those simple, ancient truths that, for whatever reason, we all seem to be trying really hard to avoid. Okay, so let's get into it. We're going to break down Lewis's argument into 5 main parts. First, this whole idea of old rules, not new ones. Then, the different jobs of the clergy and the laity. Third, we'll look at Lewis's really surprising social blueprint. Fourth, a very practical, maybe even tough rule for giving. And finally, how this whole project really starts with you.
To start, Lewis draws a really sharp line in the sand about what a real moral teacher is supposed to do.
And what's so interesting here is how he separates the real teachers from the fakes. He says the great moral teachers aren't inventors. Their job is to constantly bring us back to the truth we already know. It's the quacks and cranks, as he calls them, who are always showing up with some brand new system of right and wrong they just cooked up. So what's the core principle they bring us back to? The Golden Rule. This isn't some groundbreaking new idea. Lewis just says it's a summary of what everyone deep down has always known to be right. That's the foundation for any real social morality. Well, this brings up the next obvious question. Whose job is it to apply this rule? This is where a lot of people get mixed up, and according to Lewis, they start looking in the wrong place for answers.
Lewis points out that when people demand a lead from the church, what they really mean is a political program from the clergy. He says this is just a big mistake. The clergy are trained to deal with eternal matters, things that concern us as people who will live forever. It's the laity, the Christian economists, Christian politicians, Christian teachers, who are the experts in their fields. It's their job to figure out how to apply Christian principles to their work.
So the takeaway here is huge. It's the job of Christians working in the world to hash out the practical details, not the pastors. And this leads us to what a fully Christian society might even look like.
And this is where it gets tricky, because Lewis's vision of a Christian society doesn't fit into our neat little political boxes. For starters, he says it would look, in some ways, pretty leftist.
Its economy would be very structured. No room for parasites, for instance. If you don't work, you don't eat. Everybody works, and that work has to produce something genuinely good, not just frivolous luxuries and the silly ads you need to convince people to buy them.
But then, on the flip side, the social life of this society would look totally different to anyone visiting from our modern world. Socially, it would have a very strong sense of order and hierarchy. It would expect obedience to lawful authority, from the government all the way down to parents. He even includes the very unpopular idea about wives and husbands. It would be a place that values courtesy and cheerfulness, and it would have zero patience for busybodies. You can see the tension, right? Very few people today would be happy with that whole package. And that, Lewis says, is why we're always trying to cherry-pick the parts of Christianity that line up with our own political party. So, let's move from this big societal idea to a specific personal command. To make all this real, Lewis zeroes in on charity, and he gives one very clear rule for how much a Christian ought to give. He says, the only safe rule is this: give more than we can spare.
Yeah, that's a high standard for sure. It's supposed to be demanding. So Lewis gives us a few diagnostic questions we can ask ourselves just to check if we're actually giving enough.
He says there are 3 signs your giving is probably way too small. First, if your giving doesn't pinch or hamper your lifestyle in any way. Second, if your spending on comforts and luxuries is pretty much the same as other people with your income. And third, if there's nothing you'd like to do but can't simply because of how much you've given away. If all that's true, he says your giving is probably not enough. So you see, if the idea of building a Christian society feels a little abstract, this command about giving brings it right back home, right into our own choices and our own bank accounts. And that leads to his final point. For Lewis, real change in society starts with the individual. And here's the bottom line. A Christian society will not just show up until most of the people in it actually become Christians. Lewis calls this, the longest way round is the shortest way home. Think about it. You can't truly live out the golden rule until you love your neighbor. You can't really love your neighbor until you love God. And you can't love God until you first learn to obey Him. It all starts right there with obedience. So, this entire conversation about social morality gets driven back to something much more personal, from social programs to our own hearts.
So often we come to Christianity looking for a political ally, someone to back our team. But as Lewis puts it, we're looking for an ally, but what we're actually offered is either a master to obey or a judge to face.
Lewis's point is that you can't build a Christian society with non-Christian people. The starting point is not a political platform, but a changed heart. And so that leaves us with a final question we have to ask ourselves. What old, simple principle are you anxious not to see?